Welcome to the raw and uncensored Ambitchious Podcast. During our time here together, I will be instilling all of the strength, power, and determination you will need to use the very stones thrown at you to build your ultimate empire. We will redefine the word bitch from the derogatory to the acronym being in total control of herself. So let's adjust our crowns and prepare to live life ambitiously.
Yeah, here I am, the original HBIC, Katie motherfucking Boyd. And on today's episode of the Ambitchious Podcast, we are going down and dirty and deeper into the inner child healing work. Oh, let me tell you, just doing this, like talking out loud, there's so many emotions just running through me right now. And I'm sure that if you're doing this work as well, you feel the same exact way. When you do this work, guys, make sure that you're taking time for self-care, because this can drum up a lot of shit. Okay. This can drum up a lot of sadness, anger, resentment, anxiety, just not good feelings. You have to do the proper things on the back end to make sure that this doesn't reconsume you. That's why it's so important to have a coach. That's why it's so important to be part of a community. That's why it's so important to have healing sessions. I can do all those things with you. And if you don't feel like I'm the right fit for you, that's okay. But just find some kind of an outlet where you can process your emotions and your feelings with someone who is great at what they do and who cares. So we're just going to dive right into this. And I'm going to get through as many as I can. Again, I want to really make this series, the Healing Diaries that I've been doing, this 12 podcast episodes, I want to really show you guys, like, this is what I have been doing. This is the work I've been doing. People always say to me, like, what's the work? What's the work? Like, what helped you? What helped you? This is the work. And the real work is so uncomfortable, and the real work is so gritty, and it's so yucky, but it has to be done. Okay. So we're going to go into number 21, which is, what was your relationship with your parents like as a child, as a teenager, and now? I would say as a child, my relationship was definitely, for me, I was the entertainer. I was the peacemaker. I was the peer mediator. I definitely didn't feel like a child growing up. I definitely felt like one of the adults. I was definitely treated like one. And that was like my, sometimes I also felt like a burden to them. Like I felt like, a lot, they would kind of just have my grandmother really do a lot with me. But now that I'm older, I realized that they were working so much and there was so much going on that it probably worked out in the long run for me to be more with my grandmother than them. So that was definitely the child. As a teenager, I felt like more like a friend to my parents. I kept that caregiver, peer mediator, peacemaker role as an adult. I would listen to my mom talk about my dad in ways that I probably shouldn't have heard as like a teenager. You know, my mom would like kind of confide in me more as a friend, you know, which probably isn't healthy, but that's maybe all she had. And that's maybe how she felt safe. And now I feel still, and I love you guys, but I still feel sometimes like I'm my mom and dad's mom. Sometimes, you know, like my mom will call me and my dad will call me and they bitch and complain about certain things. And I give them like all these tools, almost like a coach or like a parent. I know that they don't take half of the information that I give them, but you know, it's worth a try. The next one, number 22, I want you to write about a difficult event from your childhood, and it doesn't have to be traumatic. How did you respond to the event? What were your feelings surrounding the event? And how did you feel about it now? Oh my gosh. Let's see. What about write about a difficult event from your childhood? Doesn't have to be traumatic. And how did you respond to this event? What were your feelings surrounding the event? And how do you feel about it now? God, there's so many. I don't know if I can even think off it'll be radio silence on the podcast for like 5 minutes. So I'm not going to answer this one. I want you to do it yourself. But I'm going to think about this, and I may come back to this later down the road when my brain kind of siphons through all these different things that I'm thinking. Number 23, what would you say to your childhood self? Oh, God. first thing that comes off the top of my head is everything is going to be okay. Like everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to work out in the end. And I would also say that like you are not the reason why your parents were the way that they are or were. Because I always felt like if I could just be better, my parents wouldn't have addiction or they wouldn't be this way, which is so not true. But when you're a little kid, that's how your brain works, right? Number 24, what were 5 activities you enjoyed as a child? Oh my God. I used to love to go fishing with my dad. He can tell you some funny stories about how I used to have this like Snoopy pole because he had like a real big fishing pole and I had like a little baby Snoopy pole, but it still had like a tackle on the end and like a hook and the whole 9 yards. And I remember we used to walk to this little pond down the street from my house and we would fish sometimes. And one day I remember casting my line and I caught his ear, I think, with the hook and I just kept pulling on it. God, I sound like Tony Soprano when he was with Dr. Melfi and she's like, don't you remember anything from your childhood? He goes, oh, I remember my dad fell down and we laughed and laughed. I'm not trying to be like a dark person, but like that is that's one activity that I like to do it as a child was fish with my dad. I loved to play. We had like a sandbox, so I loved playing in the sandbox. I loved to go into the woods when I was a little kid and just like pretend I was a fairy and like pluck, feathers and leaves and berries and all these little things. I was definitely like a forest child. I loved riding my bike as a kid. And I definitely loved entertaining. At least I thought I loved entertaining. Now that I'm older, I realized I was doing it out of fear and it was like a coping mechanism. But I loved to like sing and dance and put on shows for my cousins or my aunts or like my parents' friends that would come over and they would, laugh and they would clap and stuff. And I loved that feeling of people clapping and laughing and being entertained by me. So those are probably like my 5 activities that I enjoyed. Number 25 is, did you have a safe space as a child? And if so, what was it? I would definitely say my grandmother's house. There was always like peace in that house. It was always like my memories of childhood was like always like fresh baked cookies and breads and, sweets. And there was always like good food. And she had a beautiful garden and a beautiful flower garden. And she would like always walk with me to like this little corner store to get like candy. And she just really like we had such a close relationship. We would like watch the Golden Girls together and like I loved doing that stuff even at night. And this is why I think that I started really getting back to my Catholic roots and I started really getting back into doing the rosary as a form of meditation was because every night before I'd go to bed, I would lay in bed with my grandmother and she would rub my back or she'd like draw on my back or she'd tell me stories from her childhood and I would like pray and do all these things. And I just like that. I don't know. It just feels so good to me to get back to that. I also went to church with her every day. I went to a Catholic school and I would in the morning get up and go to church every day and I would sing in the choir. So definitely being at my grandmother's house was a safe space for me. The next one is number 26. What is one activity from your childhood you miss that you could incorporate into your adult life now, and how can you incorporate it? I don't know. I think maybe the woods thing could be good because I get super nauseous from any kind of water. So like I'm not good on a boat and I feel bad now as an adult, like hurting the fishing. So that's out of the question. I hate bicycles as an adult. They're dangerous. As I think when you're a little kid, it's different. But definitely I could probably get out in nature more, do things like that. And, you're listening to this in November of 2024. So right now it's colder than a witch's tit where I live. But definitely getting out in nature more, I think would be something huge for me. 100%. And maybe like cooking and baking, even though I'm not a great baker. And it's not that I'm not a great baker. I just don't like to follow directions. It's that fucking freedom thing again. But maybe getting back into baking. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to document some of this stuff on my social and see what's happening. Number 27. What was your favorite childhood movie or TV show? Oh, God. What feelings does it now bring up? Do you ever watch it? Okay. My favorite movie growing up, I have a bunch of them, but my favorite movie growing up was Neverending Story. And now I think back about that movie, and that's where my whole entire generation got its depression and anxiety from. When Artak and Atreyu were in the swamp of sadness and the horse started drowning in the quicksand and died, fuck. That still gives me anxiety. And yes, I will still watch it to this day. I realized how spiritual recently that movie was. So that's definitely my number one favorite childhood movie. I have other ones, but that is definitely it for me. Number 28. Who did you look up to as a child and what did you like so much about them? Oh my God. Jesus. So many people I looked up to. God, when I was little, I would have to say my Aunt Linda, which was my father's sister, who passed away when I think she was 32. I was young, but I would go over her house and she was like super healthy. So she was like always working out, playing golf, eating super healthy. She was beautiful. She was classy. She had like Lady Diana vibes. That was just how I looked at her. I really looked up to her as a child, definitely my Aunt Linda. And it's such a tragedy, right? Because I think about my grandmother, my Nana Pearl. She lost her son when he was 19. She lost her daughter when she was 32. She lost her she lost her husband a couple years before her daughter died of cancer. He passed away in our backyard. He was hitting golf balls and he had a heart attack and died really young. She had, I think my grandmother, if I'm not mistaken, had like 11 brothers and sisters. Her dad was an alcoholic. They lived in like a 1-room home in Nova Scotia, in Canso, Nova Scotia. I talk about this in my book. My grandmother had a lot of trauma and loss and grief. I look up to her a lot too. She was like the Iron Lady, you know, she was just stoic and she just never gave up. And so I think those are the two people I looked up to the most growing up. I mean, obviously I loved my mom and dad, but if I had to think of like looking up and admiring someone like, oh, I want to be like that person, I want to model myself after that person, I would definitely say that. Number 29. What self-care or feel-good activities did you turn to as a child? I loved fantasy, like anything that was fantasy that I could like pull myself out of my reality and like go there. So definitely like plays and movies. I like to read a lot as a child. I like to just get lost in the woods, like I was saying before. I thought I liked sports, but I didn't. I did it for my dad because I think there's like a weird feeling that I always felt like my dad really wanted a boy. So I tried to give him like a lot of the sports stuff. Now, when I started really competing in pageants competitively, I think he really loved that too. Like he was always very proud of me. But I think like the sports thing I did more for him. Trying to think what else. I love to cook. I love to bake. I definitely love to clean and organize, like I had said a couple podcasts back. But again, a lot of these things is a trauma response. I used to love to garden with my mom. She was president of our garden club in town, so I used to love to do that with her. So I definitely had a lot of fun activities as a child. And like as I'm saying these things, it is jogging my memory, so that makes me feel really good. Number 30. Were you close to anyone other than your parents as a child, and how did that person shape you? Like I said, I was extremely close to my Nana Pearl. She definitely shaped me with her spirituality and her religious beliefs. She, after going through so much in her life, still went to church. She never gave up on God. And I gave up on God for a really long time. Like I hated God. I hated him. I was like, why would you do this to me? How can you do this to me? I'm a good person. Like I don't deserve this. Now that I've done so much spiritual work, I realize that on a soul level, I chose all these things to happen to me, good, bad, or indifferent, because those are the things that were going to evolve me and shape me. So definitely, I was super, super, super close to my grandmother, and she was just determined and tenacious, and she was super focused. And, you know, she didn't have like a very glamorous life, but she just made the best out of it. And that to me is amazing. Number 31, what did you want to be when you grew up, and how does it differ from the way things turned out? Are you happy about the outcome? Oh my gosh. I was thinking about this the other day when I was listening to the Theo Vaughn podcast with Gabor Mate, and he was saying, if I really think about it now, I don't even know if I would want to have been a comedian, but the way I got people to laugh and validate me and think that I was enough was to make people laugh. And I think that if I would have really followed my dreams, I would have just stayed in the entertainment industry. I would have sang and acted and spoke and entertained, I really think I would have. Now, it didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to, but I still had an international television show. I still do entertain. I still do speak. I still do. It's just in a different way. But I think if I really followed the breadcrumbs the way that I thought I would, it would have probably been to stay in like the theater entertainment world. Number 30, but by the way, before I go on, I'm not upset by any means with what I do. I love what I do, but I definitely, sometimes I miss that. So I think that that's a call for me to incorporate more of that into my life to help me on this journey. Number 32, were you allowed to express your emotions as a child, or were you encouraged to suppress them? Definitely to suppress them. Like I said, people would say like, my mom would look at me and go, I'll give you something to cry about, or she'd like pinch my arm and be like, don't you even think about it kind of thing. But weren't we kind of like all kind of raised like that in the 80s? I'm not trying to make excuses, but I do know that is definitely something, right? That we all were. And I do remember holding my tears in a lot as a child. And, that affects so many things about your body. It affects your chakras. It affects your energetic system. So absolutely, I was encouraged to suppress a lot of my emotions. But then when I would go around certain people like my grandmother, I actually could express my emotions, which is probably why I liked being around her, because I felt like I could really probably be the most real of all of the people. I could be the most real version of myself around her more than anyone else, I think. Number 33, did your parents foster you to have good relationships with food and or body image, and how or why not? It's crazy. This is one thing I will say. My mother was never on a diet. I was never told I was fat or chubby, or I was never shamed for how much I ate or what I ate. And my mother, there was no diet culture in my house. I will say, when I would go over my grandmother's house, she had a magnet on her kitchen, on her refrigerator. It was this like big fat lady, and she was dressed like as an opera singer, and it said like a moment on the lips, forever on the hips. So that was definitely something that I looked at every time I opened the door at my grandmother's house. But again, I was never told no or whatever. I will say that when I did have trauma, or I did have sadness or depression or anxiety or fear or any kind of adverse feelings as a child, I was definitely plied with food. Like I definitely now realize that I'm an emotional eater, and I use food as a coping skill. I still do it to this day. I also do it with alcohol. So that's why I really don't drink that much anymore. And I only drink around people I trust. And even that, I really don't drink that much anymore. I think I had a real bad problem with alcohol during COVID, because I was just in a total fucking fear spiral like everybody else. And I know I'm not alone in that. But I never was shamed. I didn't have that. But I definitely used food as a coping skill. So yes, there was some food problems, but it wasn't like how most women will say, oh, I was told I was fat and I was this and I was that. I never had that. I was not raised by an almond mom by any stretch of the imagination. Thank God. Number 34, were your parents strict and overprotective, or were they more laid back and easygoing? How did this affect you? It was definitely oscillatory. Like my parents could be like super overprotective, and definitely like I would get in trouble a lot, and they were strict. And then there was like the other opposite end of the spectrum, where there was like, it was like no holds barred. Everything was like whatever. And there was just like no structure, which I think, and I'm going to do some podcasts about this in the future about like attachment styles. I think that actually made me like a fearful avoidant, because it was like nothing is ever homeostatic, and you don't know like what kind of energy you're going to get. So like one day you'd get like mean mommy, and the next day you'd get like loving mommy, and then you'd get drunk daddy, and then you get like fun daddy. It was just like there was never homeostasis in my house. So I think that when there's not homeostasis in your house, and some days you're walking on eggshells and some days you can do whatever the hell you want to do, it definitely sends your child brain a message that like there's no balance, things are chaotic, frenetic, and not safe. So there's that. Number 35. Did you feel like your parents allowed you to be your true self growing up? Again, I really feel like it's an oscillatory thing where it's like yes and no. And I don't know if you guys out there in Ambitchious Land feel the same way, but that's kind of how I feel. Number 36. What was your relationship like with your extended family? Was it negative or positive or anyway? Mostly negative. And again, very, this is like a theme, very confusing. Like if my mom was in good standings with my aunts and uncles, then we as children, and I'm only speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for my sister, but I one day would be with my aunt who 2 days ago beat the shit out of my mother. You know what I mean? Or I would go spend time with my godmother and my uncle, and then my mother would hate them and they would get in a fight, and then I wasn't allowed to talk to them for 6 months. My grandfather on my mother's side of the family, they weren't the best people. We didn't really have like super close relationships with them. They did a lot of horrible shit to my mom when my grandfather died. So, and then like on my other side of the family, we would see our cousins sometimes, we wouldn't see. So everything was just very, both sides of the spectrum. I'm starting to notice by doing this work live in real time here on the podcast, which again, I've done this work before, but it's different when you speak it out instead of journal it. I feel like that's a running theme in my life. Like there's never balance. There's no homeostasis. You never know what you're going to get. That can be very uneasy, even as an adult who has their shit together. Number 37. What did your friendships look like growing up? Did you find it easy or hard to make friends? Growing up, I had like a very small, close-knit circle of friends. As I got older, I had a lot more acquaintances and not so many close friends. As I became more aware of like my family dynamics, I definitely would protect myself from people finding out too much, and I'm still like that to this day. Like I'm very, very weary about who I let into my life. You have to really prove to me that you're a good person. If there is even an inclination that you're bossy or you're frenetic or you're a mean person or whatever, I can't do it because I'm just so protective of my peace and my space and my energy. And I had I thought was a good circle of friends, like maybe 10 years ago, that I do not speak to any of those people anymore because they ended up not being what I needed in my life to make my life a healing space. And it's funny, I worked so hard to get rid of those people and cut them off. And I see certain relationships in my life that are starting to act as if they are the old relationships. And I'm already starting to get like, oh no, I'm not letting this go any further than what it is, right? I'm keeping this person at arm's length. Number 38. Oh, by the way, I do feel like it's really easy to make friends, but I mean acquaintances. Like I probably have a lot of acquaintances, but I don't really think a lot of people really know me. And I'm working hard on trying to be less like that and be more open by doing things like this on today's podcast. The next one, number 38. Did you ever have any friends who were not good to you? Describe them and how they made you feel. Yes. And even in my adult life, I've had a lot of people, and you guys can go and listen to this on other podcasts, but, people who I really loved and I felt like we had like this very close bond. And then, for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. Mostly because like one friend comes up in particular where like she would always treat me like I was like a servant to her. And I was like, girl, what? And I know that it was coming from a place because she trusted me, but there was like times where I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing? Or just like always guilt tripping me if I couldn't do something for her or if I was running late. It's like people forget sometimes that I'm running like multiple businesses and doing like all these different things. And a lot of the times too, I live sometimes 3 hours away from my friends because I live in upstate New Hampshire. I mean, I live in southern New Hampshire. Some of my friends are like way at the tip of the Cape in Massachusetts or in New York or whatever. And it's like not easy just to like hop, skip, and a jump to hang out with them, you know? I desire friendships that are like loving and supportive and kind, and they're symbiotic and they're not parasitical. And you know, when people, obviously I say describe them and how they made you feel. Now I understand, because I'm very spiritually evolved and energetically and emotionally evolved. I know that no one can make me feel any way, but I definitely will say that the way I felt was just like less than, not enough, low, and just trashy, you know? And just always like I could never do enough, and it was never enough. And no matter what I did, it was like never enough. And I just don't want to feel like that ever, ever, ever. And if anyone ever tries to make me feel that way, I will not allow it, you know? So if you see me pulling away from you, it's probably because you're doing that to me. Number 39, which positive affirmations did you need to hear more often as a child? I would say that you are enough just the way you are. You don't need to try harder, and you don't need to entertain, and you don't need to sacrifice parts of yourself to make us happy. That's what I probably needed to hear the most. And that you're safe. Number 40, did you ever face self-esteem issues as a child? What is your earliest memory of these? Oh, God. God. I mean, there's so many. Fuck. God, so many are just running through my head right now. I would have to say, I remember I did this project in school. I was at a Catholic school. I was probably like 6th grade. And I had to do this project, and my mom was like, oh, I'll help you do it. And then something happened and she had to work and she couldn't help me. And I ended up like waiting until last minute, and I did it myself, and it didn't come out right. And I remember the teacher at the time, her name was Mrs. Williams or Miss Williams. She was my teacher at Taunton Catholic Middle School. She embarrassed me so bad in front of the whole class. Like, she's like, I don't even get what this is. And this is like not a good job. And she said it like in front of my whole class, which was just like, oh my God, well, I feel like the biggest loser ever. And I remember telling my mom, and she's like, oh, fuck her. She was a loser in high school and she's a loser now. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, you know, we all went to Coyle, which was like a high school together. And my mother's like, she never liked me. And I'm like saying to myself, like, is this woman taking, now as an adult, I'm like, and I know that these things happen. This is why I'm saying this. As an adult, I'm wondering, did this woman just not like my parents or not like my mother, so that she was taking her shit out on me from her own high school upbringing or childhood? Like, what if this was like misplaced meanness, you know? And that was when I first started feeling like not enough as a child. Like, I always felt like kind of fucked up, but I think it really started coming to fruition when, you know, you're going through puberty and your body's starting to change and like everything's just getting weird. And then to have an adult who you love and respect, or like a teacher, say that like you suck. It's just like, I couldn't even imagine myself as an adult saying that to another adult. And I couldn't even imagine my husband, who is like the most incredible martial arts teacher in the world with all these little kids. I could not imagine my husband speaking to any of his students like that. Like, it's just, just the thought of it makes my stomach sick. But how many people do this to children? And just that one sentence that you say to one kid can make or break the rest of their lives. Like, kids are so malleable, and they are just leaning on your validation like a bed of thorns, you know? And for you to say that to a child and embarrass them, like, fuck you. For all of you out there that did that to me, or did it to anybody else, like, fuck you. Like, you need to go see Jesus. You need to go have a little powwow with baby Jesus, because you're an asshole. And I know that like everyone's trying their best, but like, guess what? Your best wasn't good enough for you to say that to a child and break them, and not even to think of like what I was dealing with in my own home life and why the project wasn't finished or why it wasn't good. You know, why don't people ask children, like take them to the side and say, hey, you know, this isn't like you to not have a good project or to not finish it. What's going on? I probably would have told her, but no one cared enough. So if you're a teacher out there and you're listening to this podcast, please don't do that to your kids. you don't realize kids are acting out because there's probably some real crazy shit going on at home and they just don't know how to process. So they're just acting out, or they're dropping the ball, or they're disassociating or whatever. Okay. On next week's podcast, we're going to go even deeper into these journal prompts. I hope that you're loving this as much as I am. I think this is so healthy. On the Ambitchious Podcast, I always try to educate you, entertain you, and empower you, but I also want to give you real, tangible tools to use. And these are the tools that I have been using to heal my inner child and heal my parentification. And I hope that you do the same. So in the meantime, if you love this podcast, share it out. Don't forget to tag me. And please, please, please do this work. It's so important. And in the meantime, don't forget to stay ambitious. And I will see you next Tuesday.